Okay. Um, Welcome. I am Scott Steen, the Executive Director of the American Physiological Society. I am here today with Dr. Terry Sweeny, Professor of Biology and Physiology Program Director at the University of Scranton. Terry is also the newly appointed chair of the new APS Center for Physiology Education. Our conversation today will be excerpted in a new column in the Physiologist magazine called Evolution, which will focus on significant issues affecting our community and the people who are making a difference. Today, we'll be talking about the state of physiology education in the US, how the challenges we face differ depending on the educational setting, and what we as a discipline can do to advance the teaching of physiology regardless of setting. So welcome, Terry. I am wondering if you would kick us off just by giving us some highlights of your career, both as an educator and a physiologist.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. My doctorate is in biophysics, and that followed undergraduate degrees in chemistry and physics. And through my biophysics degree, I essentially studied microvascular physiology at the University of Rochester with Dr. Ingrid Cerelius, a longtime APS member. And from there, I went to the University of Arizona for my postdoctoral training with Dr. Bob Gore. And so we studied various aspects of microvascular control of organ function. First starting out with muscle function when I was in the Cerelius lab, continuing with that somewhat in the Gore lab, and then actually moving on to do microvascular control in the testicular circulation, which was a collaboration with some endocrinologists. And then when I moved to my current position, now over 30 years ago at the University of Scranton, I developed a microvascular preparation to study vascular control related to ovarian function. As I moved to the University of Scranton, I moved into a primarily educational position, tenure track position here. The University of Scranton is a primarily undergraduate institution. I joined the biology department there. A great majority of our students at that time were pre-med students. Things have broadened somewhat since that time. We send more students to graduate schools and so forth, but things like medical school, PA, physician assistants, and things like physical therapy are their goals for careers. And so over the years, I maintained my research, but also as time went on, moved my scholarship towards really things that could improve teaching of physiology. So I was hired as the physiologist in the department, and from the very beginning, I taught general physiology and then went on to develop courses in cardiovascular physiology. Another course I'm especially fond of, an extreme physiology course that's a travel human performance course that takes place in Arizona, where I collaborate with some people in physiology at the University of Arizona. Over the years then, I've taken on various leadership positions at Scranton, as well as in my professional societies. I spent 6 years as chair of the biology department here. And during that time, only about 5 years ago, we developed our own undergraduate program in physiology, which has been growing quite well and has been well received.
Was that move to a more education-centered position deliberate on your part? I mean, was it something that you wanted for your career? It seems now more and more postdocs are actually either because they deliberately want that, or because it's just sort of what's available, that they're moving more toward education. You did it, you were a pioneer, you did it a little earlier.
Yeah, I think as with a lot of people's career, it was in some ways an evolution, but also a look back at what I found satisfying. So in fact, my undergraduate career began at Colgate University, which is a liberal arts university. And I began there as a pre-med student, but it was actually my research experience at Colgate that really taught me that I was a scientist. And so I made that transition from wanting to go to medical school to actually deciding that I wanted to obtain my PhD and become a scientist. But it was really the interaction with the faculty at Colgate that made me really see the value of a strong educational experience. And even through graduate school and my postdoc, I kind of held on to that idea that I would really enjoy an educational role in my professional life. And so I went back and forth. I didn't know if I was going to wind up at an R1 institution or primarily undergraduate, interviewed in both types of places, but finally settled on Scranton and really was happy with that decision. And it did take some, some pushing. Luckily, I got a lot of support from Ingrid Shurelius as my graduate mentor and Bob Gore as my postdoctoral mentor when I spoke to them about wanting an educational career. And Bob himself went to Carleton College, another liberal arts school. And so he understood the value of that. And so they were really helpful and instrumental in helping me make the transition from essentially a research position at medical schools to something that was at a primarily undergraduate institution. But it was quite different at that time. All of my peers, they were looking for positions at R1 institutions.
Right. And so how would you characterize the state of physiology education right now in America? I mean, what do you think the biggest challenges we're facing are?
Yeah, so for some years, physiology education in America has really been undergoing a considerable amount of change at all the different levels of education. And I learned a lot about this in the past year, and I want to get back into that a little bit more as we started to develop the APS's Center for Physiology Education, working with task force that worked on their goals, as well as with focus groups at vetting those goals. And so what I learned through that was really at the medical school level, classic courses in medical physiology have been merging with clinical and problem-based learning approaches. And in the process, the identity of physiology at that level has started to become somewhat obscure. Also at the graduate level for doctoral master's programs, the focus has been on these amazing discoveries at the cellular and molecular level and utilizing all those amazing techniques that have come about. But a lot of members have expressed concern about the depth of training in integrative physiology, even at the graduate level. In fact, I was talking to a colleague just yesterday who said that graduate students who come into their physiology graduate program, some of them have never even had a physiology course, like an introduction to physiology or a general physiology course. And so while they can dig into the details of some protein in the cell and how it's regulating a process, there's some trouble in integrating that out to the broader picture, which is what is so fundamental to physiology. On the other hand, physiology programs, which were almost completely the domain of graduate education, is now really experiencing huge growth at the undergraduate level. And that ironically is helping to reclaim the domain of physiology. And hopefully is, of course, preparing our next generation of physiologists, not only in the biomedical realm, but in graduate school, in medical education, and so forth.
So do you think the mantle of sort of the identity of the discipline is really sort of moving to undergraduate institutions? And it's one of the first things when I was interviewed for my job as executive director one of the biggest concerns expressed by the search committee was this idea of the identity of the discipline, that perception of the discipline had shifted, that it was, even though our members were working on all sorts of cutting edge things, that the public perception of physiology had changed because of, largely driven by what was happening in medical schools and in other institutions of learning. And so do you think now really that identity is going to be defined at the undergraduate level more?
Well, I think it as well is sort of an evolutionary process. It does seem to be most clear right now at the undergraduate level. But of course, if we look forward many years, right, those students are the ones that are going to be populating our graduate programs and ultimately are going to be becoming our medical educators and so forth. So I feel that it is an opportunity for the reemergence of physiology at those more upper levels as the understanding of what physiology encompasses becomes once again more clear. But we are experiencing, that identity crisis, because even for the undergraduate programs, when we talk to high school seniors that are coming to evaluate our programs, their understanding of physiology is not good. And so it's almost in their freshman year when they take their general biology course and they start to study muscle function and nervous function and digestive function and so forth, that we can then say, this is physiology, right? This is why you should be important and why you should take an integrative approach to how you learn these things.
I mean, what do you think it means for medical education, for future doctors in this country, that they're learning less and less science in medical school, that they really are sort of jumping in with clinical study immediately and not learning these kind of foundations?
Yeah, so I'd really like to speak to more of my medical educator colleagues to get a really good sense of what's going on there, because I think that the whole curriculum for medical education is still somewhat heterogeneous, right? So some schools are still doing traditional physiology education at the first year levels and so forth, and others are jumping straight into more clinical problem-based aspects of it. And it is still the physiologists that are delivering that. But on the other hand, we've heard from the people that have been in these programs for years and are looking to the next generation of instructors, and they're struggling with finding people who can teach integrative physiology because of recent focus on our most cutting edge advances, but maybe with a loss of intention to the integrative nature of physiology.
So what do you think are the most promising trends in physiology education right now? Well, what makes you hopeful?
So I would say one of the things that makes me hopeful is this emergence of physiology as a discipline at the undergraduate level, and in particular, the focus on integrative physiology at that level. Secondly, really, and as you know, the APS has begun this emergence of the Center for Physiology Education, right? One of three APS cornerstone initiatives from its recent strategic plan. And as we worked to launch this in the past year, we heard nothing but enthusiasm for building a community that could drive the best practices in physiology education, not really just at the undergraduate level, but at the graduate level, at the medical school level, and really helping to ensure that our next generation of physiology educators can take that integrative approach and really reclaim the identity of physiology in the educational realm.
What do you see as the major goals for the center? And this is, I think, from what I've heard, one of the most exciting initiatives we've undertaken in a very long time. And I think there's enormous energy. But what do you actually want to happen? What do you see coming out of this center?
Yeah, and then we've our task force that APS put together to come up with the goals and objectives for the CPE, the Center for Physiology Education, really had a broad base, and we got a lot of input. We also then did focus groups to vet the goals and objectives that we came up with. And far and away, the most important thing that people wanted was a vibrant and inclusive community of physiology educators. They wanted to be able to reach out to people that were like-minded, that could contribute new ideas as well, and not only have a place where they could garner information, but a place where they could share their own discoveries about how to best teach integrative physiology and so forth. And so really, this idea that we could develop a shared vision of physiology education and tailor it for each level of instruction, that's, I think, the most promising idea.
You know, I know already there work's underway to develop sort of a host of resources and offerings for the center. And what do you think those, what are sort of your priorities for developing offerings for the center?
Right. So based on the goals and objectives, we then went on to develop the key themes that we hope will be driving the CPE for the next few years. And those include evidence-based teaching practices, inclusive teaching, and inclusive teaching meaning bringing in ideas like gender and racial differences in physiology and so forth, teaching and learning integrative physiology, promoting physiology research, and finally curriculum development, right? So these are the things that we heard the greatest need for. We really want to start our offerings with teaching and learning integrative physiology. And so we've really started to do this, and we're doing it by tapping into the expertise of the APS members. We're asking them to create presentations on teaching and learning of physiology, and we're asking them to link it back to the integrative nature of physiology, as well as link it to these core concepts in physiology that we really feel are the cornerstone of an integrative approach to teaching physiology. And those were developed by Joel Michael, William Cliff, Jenny McFarland, and Harold Modell over many recent years. And in fact, our first presentation is going to be by Joel and Jenny to really talk about how somebody can use these core concepts to take an integrative approach to teaching physiology.
So you talked about the importance of the center developing community, and that is sort of a real need within the physiology educator community. What do you think that looks like? How does that manifest itself when the center is built out?
Yeah, so we wanted to have several different aspects to it. We'd like to have an annual meeting that can allow people to meet face to face and talk about their ideas and best practices. But more than that, we have to have something that's more immediate and available. And so we're developing a learning management system that can not only be a home for content that we create and we curate, but that will let people interact. And so we also want to take advantage of some social media tools so that people can actually have that type of community that's available to them almost on a 24/7 basis. A lot of these things are still being built out, and we're trying to figure out the best ways to do that. But we want it to be a continuous community, not something that's just present at a once-a-year meeting, but that people can reach out to and feel not only that they can gain information from, but that they can contribute to.
That's great. And I know we are at very early stages here. You know, we're just coming up to the initial launch of the center. But I want you to imagine 5 years from now, and we have been wildly successful with the Center for Physiology Education. Everything has gone perfectly. How is physiology education different as a result? I mean, what do you think has changed if that happens?
I think maybe foremost is that we've now emphasized the need to be integrative in a person's understanding of physiology. That as we take these amazing tools that let us look into the cell and understand the functions that are going on at that level, that physiologists now appreciate that they have to build back out and be able to relate that to the interdependency that's going on between different systems that control overall function, and that they can further expand that to pathophysiology and to environmental physiology and things like that. And so have this broader understanding of that. And in that process, then make it clear that so many things that we now give different names, you know, neuroscience and so forth, it's physiology, right? And so we start to reclaim that idea of what physiology is, and that through understanding of best practices, we have, to the extent that it's useful, a more common approach to educating physiologists at all different levels.
Wonderful.
So whether it's a graduate or medical or graduate school.
That's great. Thank you so much, Terry, for your time. And I am, like everyone else, sort of can't wait to see this reach fruition and have that kind of impact. So thanks.